Good morning and welcome to Godly Play. I wonder if it's been as stormy at your house in the last week or so as it has been at mine. We've had some really wild storms here at my house. I took some video of one of the storms so you can see how wild the wind was and how much rain was coming down. Well, today we have another story about Paul. And Paul is dealing with some stormy weather in this story too. You know, I kind of feel like we should have titled this series of stories about Paul something like The Wild and Crazy Adventures of Paul, or Paul Crisscrosses the Mediterranean, or The Amazing Travels of Paul. As I've been reading through some of these stories, Paul has just been everywhere in the area of the Mediterranean Sea. He was in Israel and Turkey and near Greece. And in today's story, he's going to be on his way to Rome. So let's listen to this story about storms and traveling and see what kind of adventures Paul has today and how he uses his adventures to spread Jesus' message. In last week's story, Paul and Silas were in jail. Well, today's story starts with Paul in jail again. Paul was in jail sort of near Jerusalem, in the area of Jerusalem. Paul was in jail many times during his life. Sometimes he was put in jail just for talking to people about Jesus. Unfortunately, even sometimes when you're doing the right thing, you can get into trouble. And that seemed to happen to Paul. Well, Paul was in jail for 2 years. And finally, he talked the authorities into sending him to Rome to stand trial. That's because Paul was a Roman citizen, and he had the right to have a trial in Rome. So finally, the authorities decided that they had to send Paul to Rome. Well, on his travels, they assigned a guard named Julius to escort Paul to Rome. Paul wasn't the only prisoner going there, though. There were lots of prisoners and other passengers that went along on the trip to Rome with Julius and Paul. Now, the trip that they took to Rome was by boat. They had to go from one end of the Mediterranean Sea to another end of the Mediterranean Sea where Rome was located. See if you can find that on the map that I sent you this week. Well, the ship that they traveled on had to make several stops along the way between the area of Jerusalem and Rome. They had to stop to pick up cargo, and they had to stop to drop off cargo and to pick up other passengers. Sometimes Paul was allowed to get off the ship and visit people he knew or to make new friends. But it was the fall of the year, and in the fall, the Mediterranean Sea could be very rough. Okay. In fact, one time or two, as they were going about their journey, Paul advised the captain of the ship that maybe this wasn't such a good time to be traveling to Rome. But they went about their way anyway. The winds blew and the seas became very rough, and sometimes the storm got very bad. Water sprayed into the boat the boat sprang leaks. And they were very worried about the boat taking on too much water. At some points in their journey, the sailors would throw some of the cargo overboard to try to make the boat lighter. But the boat bounced around in the storm for days. Some of the time, the sailors and the passengers didn't even bother to eat because they were so worried about the storm. Some days it was so dark in that stormy weather that they couldn't even see the sun or the stars. They were really worried about whether they would make it through the storm. Even though Paul had advised the captain not to sail during this stormy weather, once they were going, Paul knew they had to keep sailing on towards Rome. And he tried as much as he could to encourage the sailors and the other passengers. One day, Paul stood up amongst the sailors and the passengers, and he said, "Don't worry, none of you will lose your life on this boat. Last night, an angel of God came to me and said, 'Don't be afraid, Paul. You must get to Rome and have your trial before Caesar in Rome. And God will get you there, and God will save everyone who is sailing with you.'" So Paul passed that message on to the sailors and the passengers to try to encourage them and keep them from being afraid through the storm. One day, Paul took bread and he prayed to God and thanked God for the bread and told everybody to eat what they could. Remember, they hadn't eaten for several days, and Paul knew they were going to need the strength of some food to help them get through that last part of the stormy trip. Well, finally, the sailors and passengers saw some land ahead. It was a sandbar. So that was encouraging to them. They needed to get out of those stormy waters and onto some land. And just as they spotted the land, a huge wave rolled over the ship, and the boat cracked in half. You can see where the wood is breaking up there. Some of the soldiers couldn't swim, and some of the prisoners was chained together. So Julius, remember Julius was the guard, said to free all the prisoners, let them jump overboard and swim to safety. The passengers who couldn't swim used pieces of the ship to hang on to while they floated to the shore. But just as Paul said, they all made it to shore. They were tired and bruised, but they were alive. God had kept them safe, just like Paul said he would. Well, we've had some really crazy and sort of scary stories about the adventures of Paul. I don't think I would have wanted to be in some of the situations he was in. I think one of the most amazing things about Paul is, though, that whatever situation he was in, he always seemed to know and believe very strongly that God would get him through those situations. God would always take care of him and make sure that he ended up in the next place that he was supposed to be. So in the coming weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the travels of Paul and about the people that he met and how he was able to keep in touch with those people and encourage them as they built the early church. So I hope you got the maps and some of the other things I sent you about Paul. I always find it kind of fun to follow along when I'm listening to these stories, to follow along on the map and track where Paul was coming and going from. I hope you have a very good week. I hope it's not too stormy of a week and everything stays clear and sunny and bright at your house. And Miss Helen and I will see you very soon. We're looking forward to that day. Have a great week. Bye-bye.